dum. Dumpy dumpy dum. Dumpy 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 dum. Dumpy dee dum. Dumpy dee dum. Not a person on his own life. Dumpy dee dum. And there's not a single person in sight. Dumpity dum. Dumpity dum. Dumpity dum. Dumpity dum. Dumpity dum. Is there anybody out there? Jan, welcome. Good to see you again. Surprised to see you here on TikTok. But welcome, welcome. Welcome to the weird and the wonderful with me, Strange Bones. And Jan Pelser too. It's good to see you all guys joining in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Adam, I hope you're in good form. So, let's get started with our usual. Thank you so much for the likes there, Adam. So as you know, we only have one rule on this channel, and that is to be polite. That we do not allow people to be rude, and if anybody is rude, we give you the boot. So we have a lot of different people from different religions, different cultures, and we respect everybody. But that said, we are here to examine and consider the weird things out there, and our current topic that we are going around the world and looking at different countries and cultures for is witchcraft. What is out there, and should we be worried? Let's see what we can find, because tonight, as per viewer request, we are doing Egypt. So remember, like, share, subscribe, do all of the good things to keep the channel going, help us reach our goals and all the rest of it. And with that, let's get started. So what can we say about ancient Egypt? Well, we can absolutely say much thanks for those likes, but there was no real equivalent in ancient Egypt to the modern Western concept of a witch, or even some of the older concepts in the West of a witch. And that's kind of because, for the most part, in Egypt, you will find that magic was a given thing. It was considered to be an automatic part of life. Everybody believed in it, and it was fundamental to their worldview and their religion, and indeed a very important part, without which you probably won't make it to a decent afterlife. So it was an incredibly important aspect. It was used by skilled individuals, including priests, healers, wise women, and more. And in general, there was not in the past a negative view at all. It was very much an influencing, an important thing. And of course, it was called Heka. And Heka was both the practice of magic and the god. Hey, ghost, welcome, welcome. So, in that regard, Heka was fundamental to managing life at all. Now, amongst others that used it, of course, the top people. Hey, Elf. Hey, Johannes. The top people were the priests. And as we know, there were quite a few different priests because, of course, it is a polytheistic religion. And as such, there were quite a few different gods, all of which were very important. And there were varied temples to all of them in the upper and lower Nile areas. And of course, Egypt per se was centered on the Nile. And the priests very much were the controlling body when it came to access to magical texts and knowledge, and it was kept in the temples and the temple libraries. And they were responsible for the very important rituals, including the most important ones being guiding the dead and protecting the rulers. But besides them, there were also quite a lot of others, some of which were more available to the poorer folk. In that regard, healers and midwives who used Heka to perform specific tasks, treating poisons, aiding in childbirth, and more. And then there were also the wise women who used Heka for healing purposes and combating harmful spirits. So, unlike in a great many of the cultures that we have come across thus far, pretty much all of them, in fact, by and large, there was no negative stereotype of the witch. There was no sort of outcast type. Magic was integrated into everyday living, used for protection, healing, and divining of the future. Very important things. So it was not seen as something that was moralized. So it was not considered inherently moral or immoral. It was application that mattered. So if you used it for good, that was good. And if you used it for evil, then of course that was evil. Healing was the most important thing for the general public. And then, of course, afterlife rituals. But what you might not realize is that, in general, proper afterlife rituals were far too important to waste on the common folk. So you had to have a few pennies to be able to achieve a decent afterlife. It was quite important. But Heka was also used as a defensive mechanism for punishment, and figures representing enemies could be subjected to symbolic acts of damage. Well, yes, in a great many ways. It seems that if you look at history, you will quickly find that in order to get a decent afterlife, you had to be able to afford it. And much of what was required to get there properly was quite important, because when you got to the afterlife, you would be judged by Anubis, who would weigh your heart against the feather of Maat. And the problem with that is, if your heart weighed more than the feather of Maat, then it was straight into the Duat to be whisked away to the bad areas. Do you have to be Egyptian? Well, you see, here's the thing by and large. it's a difficult question to answer in that they believed at least you had to follow the proper rituals. So as long as you did, you were okay. But seeing as foreigners didn't, I would suggest that foreigners didn't really get to go to a proper afterlife for the most part, because they didn't do things properly. So if you didn't believe, I suppose that by and large, the Egyptians wouldn't have cared too much what happened to you. You were considered a foreigner and therefore not important in that regard. So, in early cultures, I suppose you could say you either were in on it or you weren't. Um, well, fortunately, at least in the case of the Egyptian religions, there's a great deal that they did write down. We are lucky in that a lot of their practices and things were written down, and we have, due to things like the famous Rosetta Stone, been able to translate a lot of it. So there's a lot of things that we do actually know. And of course, because the culture has been around for so long, um, it meant that they've recorded for quite a long time. So it does make it a very rich source of information, and research does give us that. Huge thanks for those likes there. That was very, very kind of you. Um, what do I believe in? Well, I don't believe in the Egyptian religion. I can promise you that. And in that regard, this is more, shall we say, an academic examination of what was believed and how people have viewed the concept of magic and witchcraft and such over the ages and in different cultures, to see what people have thought. Um, that is an interesting translation, not the original, of course. The NIV is a very bad translation. I would advise the Jerusalem Bible if you're going to go for good quotes in that regard. It's a far more accurate translation. The NIV is easy reading, to be honest, not a good academic study. You will find that when it comes to translations, the NIV is a little bit modified to make it easier to read. I will admit that the Jerusalem is a lot harder to read, but it is far more rewarding if you are interested in the early Hebrew studies. Psalms being obviously part of the early texts. But yes, but nevertheless, as we progress, let us move on with our examination of Heka and what it was seen to be. Now, Heka, by and large, was considered to be a cosmic force, a power, if you will, that is there, potent, like electricity, is there, it's powerful, it's usable, but it is not inherently good or bad. Certainly strange in many ways, all pervasive. A very interesting comment that was made to me once in terms of Heka was, if you're into your Star Wars, it would be a lot like the Force. All pervasive, in everything, important for everything, supporting everything, but not good or bad as such, though it could be used in either way if you were so moved. Now, in that regard, it was very necessary for the world. It's what sustained the world, this Heka. So it made the viewpoint of magic, not just something that was part of magic per se, and not just part of religion, but it was considered to be a part of medicine. Um, they were all part of a single thing. And I would imagine that they would have also considered science to also incorporate Heka in that regard. Very important and necessary thing to understand the world as such. It was a very practical thing, just as we would look on electricity in that way, a force, a tool, something that you need, that you use every day, and you require to be able to live your normal life. So magic was seen much in the same way. It protected you from a number of different harms. It kept bad spirits away. It would heal, it would protect, it would help achieve fertility, prosperity, luck, and all of these things as well. And therefore, it wasn't so much a specialized and mystical thing in that regard. It was a needed and important thing that specialists were able to access and use. And of course, therefore, the practices were quite involved and fairly varied. You had spells and incantations, recitation of specific words, the secret names of deities, the use of words to activate supernatural powers and effect changes. There were rituals and gestures, things that you had to do, pointing, stamping, music, dance, all of these things as well, which, along with the words, could be used to activate Heka. There were, of course, a number of symbolic objects. Amulets were incredibly popular in ancient Egypt for protective powers and other symbolic items, potions, and more. Um, and honey, believe it or not, was very popular, as was certain oils to anoint and achieve transfer of Heka. We know, for example, in the funeral rites, you absolutely had to have the correct cornucopic vases and things for the specific different parts that were removed, etc. And they had to be made with the likeness of the important specific deities that dealt with the varying bits, I suppose. So, very, very important. But it was basically understood that you couldn't live life without having magic in it. It was absolutely necessary, as well as for the more specialized use of protecting against curses and spirits. It just helped you deal with everyday business. It was absolutely a very important part of medicine. So the magic, the transfer of Heka and life force went along with the physical medicines to do the healing, the restoration of the senses, um, and of course, very much used in the things like the opening of the mouth ceremonies and other such important religious ceremonies. And as we very well know, hugely important to funeral rites, especially if you were important, as is evidenced, of course, by the Great Pyramids, which were all about that. Spells were written on papyruses, um, cartonnage, tomb walls, all to guide the deceased through the dangers of the underworld, because you didn't just die and go to heaven type thing, or there was a whole process, and you had to pass through certain obstacles and dangers. And if you did it incorrectly, even if you were a good person, you wouldn't make it through to the end. You had to walk the walk, as it were. And for that, you had, for example, the famous Book of the Dead, which literally was a field manual for getting to heaven. So all of these things were very, very important. Now, even though witches today are mostly associated with your Halloween, Salem witch trials, and all of that kind of thing, witchcraft has been around for centuries, and you get all kinds of different varieties. Now, the Egyptians went at it with a very mathematical precision. Instead of fearing witches, they viewed them with reverence and as a necessity. They were called on to solve any number of problems facing all levels of citizens. And the people who were the top dog, as we have said, were the priests. And they were the guardians of the knowledge bestowed upon human by the gods, so that they could ward off the negative hands of fate. There were different levels of priests, but it was the lector priests that were able to read the ancient magical text that possessed the greatest magic. Lector priests were in charge of protecting the ruler and guiding the dead on their path to rebirth. There were also healing priests who could ward even off the plague, and lower priests who could deal with things like reptiles, insects, or vermin in the cities and such like. So, as you can imagine, uh, there was a great deal in that regard that went on. Now, in the first millennium BC, magic was no longer only in the hands of the priests, and it fell to magicians and witches who could then control the magic and help the people. Midwives and nurses were said to have magic about them to help sick and women in childbirth. It was also written that specialist wise women might be consulted if a ghost or deity was believed to be causing trouble for somebody. But no matter the time, magic played a major role in society. And those who touted themselves as magicians with the ability to wield magic did so by connecting themselves with a certain god. It was this god that would grant them the power, and it would be the focus of their magic. They were immensely fond of spells, amulets, and each of these had very distinct purposes. The now famous Book of the Dead had a wide range of different spells that were believed to change the fate of those who sought the help of the priest or the magician. The magician's powers were somewhat limited in that magicians believed that the only way to perform a spell against another person was if you knew their private name, the name only known by the individual and their own mother. Most Egyptians would have a public name, and they were known by that by everyone else, and then a name that they kept secret so as to protect themselves from bad magic. It is seen that this belief actually, interestingly enough, if you look upon some of the old Judaic texts, that they had similar beliefs where they speak of the name above every name. It shows the importance of names in a lot of Middle Eastern viewpoints. And magic was used not only to sort yourself out and to improve your own self, but also to use it against enemies, which matters. So the basis for Egyptian witchcraft come from quite a range of sources. A practitioner of magic had to know alchemy, astrology, astronomy, animal concoctions, herbal medicines, and it took a combination of these with a mix in of religion and relationship with a personal God to make someone truly skilled in that regard. The most powerful skills were written ones because so little of the population was literate that a written spell would not only be seen as hugely valuable, but would literally be passed down in families as well. Hey, Minsky. Wands were also used and were intricately decorated and very highly prized. They were used to summon magical beings and force the being to obey the magician or priest or witch. Semicircular ivory wands were known to be used around the second millennium BC. Some believe they were used to draw protective circles around those that were vulnerable, such as women giving birth or those that were ill. And if you've ever seen such a wand, unlike the Harry Potter ones, which are all straight, these things looked a lot more like a boomerang. And then carved with a number of symbols and writing. And here again, we see the basis of the belief that writing is a form of magic. A fact which, as I've said before, is shown by the fact that even in the modern day, we refer to the correct way of writing as spelling. Now, it's interesting to note that amulets were also used for protection, spells, magic. They could be made by a skilled practitioner, either male or female, and would be worn by an individual for protection or used in said spells. Strangely enough, individuals performing spells was not frowned upon by the leaders or the priests because it was not common for anyone to do harmful magic. It was generally believed that only foreigners did bad magic. Egyptians themselves were only known to do truly bad magic against enemies. If the state wanted to punish an enemy or a traitor, they would write the name of the person on pots, tablets, or on bound figurines. The figurines, I believe, were called ushabti. Made of varying things, including wax. And these objects were then burned or buried in the belief that this would weaken their enemy. There was a ceremony even that the priest could perform that would curse the enemies of the divine order, such as the chaos serpent Apophis, who was always at war with the sun god Ra. Images of those that were believed to be threatening the divine order would be drawn on papyrus or molded out of clay, and they would then be trampled, burned, and stabbed, and then the remnants dissolved in urine. These ceremonies also allowed for any human enemies of the pharaoh to be drawn and cursed as well. So it was a pretty important thing. During the reign of Ramesses III, a group of priests, harem girls, and courtiers decided to use a book of destructive spells against the king and his bodyguards. The harem girls were able to get the needed hair to place on the figurines in order to improve the power of the spells. However, the plot failed to bring down the king, and all of those involved were condemned to execution, proving that either magic was not as powerful as the Egyptians believed, or that you could not manage to use it against one that the gods had chosen to rule. And remember, of course, that the pharaohs were considered to rule by divine right, which absolutely was very important. Now, magic in ancient Egypt. Curses, amulets, exorcisms, and spells went way beyond black magic. It was too normal for everybody to want it. The universe couldn't exist without it. And it was absolutely everywhere. But, as we have pointed out, it really did require a lot of learning in order to master it. And very few people had the time or the ability outside of the priestly castes. So they believed that Heka did all of it. But Heka, as I have said, was also one of the gods and the god of magic. So in that regard, it was ruled over by its namesake. Now, according to the Egyptian worldview, the entire universe had arisen from the waters of the Nun, a primordial ocean that potentially contained all things, up to and including the gods themselves. The land emerged from that ocean, and on that first hill, the first creator god had arisen, and that demiurge created the rest of the world. Now, which god was it? Bearing in mind that in Egypt, it wasn't all one kingdom all of the time. So in Heliopolis, Ra was considered to be the one who was the first. In Memphis, it was Ptah, and in Hermopolis, it was Thoth. So different gods dependent on where it came from. The primal life force that made it possible to do all of this and to maintain this incredibly delicate cosmic balance was Heka, something even older than the gods themselves. And the gods, the magicians, and the pharaoh all possessed Heka in greater or lesser amounts. They had that magical power linked to creation itself, and as such, it allowed them to manipulate the universe, such as it was known. So, what was the point of a priest? Well, different categories obviously had different jobs. The lectors or the readers instructed in the houses of life. And they're not just intermediaries between men and gods, as priests pretty much everywhere are. They were also powerful magicians who know how to handle Heka in rites in order to keep the universe in balance. Every night, Ra, the sun god, crosses the sky in his boat, and the horizon disappears from view, though the west, or through the west, to emerge again strong and glorious, rejuvenated through the east. But his journey through the underworld is fraught with danger. The forces of chaos associated with the primitive ocean do not rest in their endeavor to submerge the universe back into the ocean from which it arose. And therefore, before being able to be reborn in the east, the sun god has to face the incarnation of these powers of chaos, the fearsome and colossal serpent, Apep, which attacks the solar boat every night. And this is another thing that came up in the last live, that we have sort of an innate suspicion, if you will, of snakes, and it shows up in so many different cultures in that regard. So absolutely, yes, and we have...
And who has no partners.
Welcome.
Which changed the world in the area in which...
Okay, that's just a touch on the noisy, so we're going to have to disconnect somebody else's live that appears to be going on there. I'm sorry about that, peoples. So, as we're saying about the priests, the gods use Heka to confront Apep and to safeguard the boast of the sun, and indeed the entire universe. So Heka is something that the gods themselves used. Now, in fact, Heka is a god, and he accompanies Ra and protects him. And meanwhile, on Earth, the magician priests perform the rites and acts of magic to help the god and his companions in his trials. Now, magicians also fulfill courtly functions. They interpret the dreams of the pharaoh, advise him, perform rituals and spells to strengthen and aid the pharaoh in all that he does. And other priests use magic for other different purposes as well in different parts of general living, basically. And they all specialized in different particular things. So the Wabu Sekhmet, the pure of Sekhmet, priests of the lioness goddess, know the secrets of medicinal magic, and they were particularly doctors and healers. Um, okay, we don't allow rudeness on the channel, I am afraid. That is our one rule. So, goodbye. So, for those who insist on being rude, we throw them out. They might like it, they might hate it, we don't care. But in that regard, we are carrying on. So, what about the Pharaoh? How did he use Heka and what was important for him? The magic and power of the Pharaoh. Well, the Pharaoh, because he is royal and the chosen of the gods, the son of Horus in that regard, he had special power, and a power that Egyptians took very, very seriously indeed. The force that emanates from the Pharaoh permeates even his clothing and the objects that are in contact with him, and a dangerous force that could, in fact, be even lethal if not handled properly. So, in many ways, while he used his power to control the nation and the people and protect it in that regard, um, people in general, especially common people, had to be protected from him, which is very, very important. So, in that way, he was both an important power but also a danger. So you had to know what you were doing. Now, what about the spells themselves? We said that there was protective magic that was used, and just being alive, it seems, was a pretty dangerous thing. All sorts of stuff could happen. So, in the imagination of ancient Egyptians, the invisible world was inhabited by a host of demons, emissaries, envoys of the gods, dangerous deceased who survived, and were described as deformed beings who walk with their feet and head backwards, fearsome characters that they believed were responsible for everything from strange noises in the night to sudden deaths or anything like that. Um, Appearances before the living of things that could not be explained, or even nightmares. And all of this, of course, very much needed to be protected from. So, apotropaic spells and rites were performed to keep them all at bay and away from the weakest, especially children and women about to give birth and mothers who had recently given birth. They all needed special protection. So, a good number of objects known as magic knives are found in quite a few archaeological sites that were literally there to defend a mother and child from evil creatures. So there was a lot of stuff that really mattered in that regard. Now, of course, you had to know your gods. You had to know how to deal with the varied gods. Um, And if you didn't follow everything properly, things could go very south indeed. It could become quite difficult to manage life in general. Um, Now, as things have moved on, you might then ask, well, fine, all of this has come from the old ways, things which surely now don't exist anymore. That by and large, um, surely we don't have stuff like this, do we? But the answer to that is, well, not actually what you might think. And the reason is that witchcraft in modern Egypt is equally as complicated and strange. Hey, Wendy. Hey, Smiley. We find that there is Chemeticism, which is the reconstruction in a modern way of the ancient Egyptian religion, a lot like Wicca is a reconstruction of older European religions. There are also traditional practices rooted in folk magic that are quite distinct from both their own ancient beliefs and Western interpretations of witchcraft. And while ancient Egyptians viewed Heka as integral and life affirming, modern Egyptians often navigate its presence within different religion context. The state sponsored religion discourages most such practices, viewing them as illegal or associated with the forbidden and prohibitive concept of the jinn. Now, today, magic is often seen through an Islamic lens, with folk practices such as using talisman or consulting traditional healers for protection from malicious forces like the jinn, and sometimes existing alongside or even in opposition to official religious teachings. We know that Chemeticism is the modern pagan revival movement, drawing on ancient Egyptian religions and magical traditions, and practitioners honor deities like Isis and Ra and use sacred symbols and engage in rituals and meditations based on the ancient practices. There is the Zar ceremonies, which we came across in Ethiopia quite a lot in the last live. Endless Thoughts, my dear, welcome back. Good to see you. We've had quite a bouncy live thus far. Already we've had one Christian going at us, and we've been insulted by Imran Elser Eber, 34, but we had to boot him off. So all sorts of fun and games. Thank you so much for the likes and for the wonderful heart that you have sent. And yes, we are finding out that the ancient Egyptian Heka is not lost, but has been brought forward in modern Chemeticism, which is pretty cool. We also find that Zar is very much an Egyptian thing, as we discussed in the last live, but it's got its own Egyptian flair. And of course, as we know, Zar involves communal dance rituals led by Zar masters to appease spirits believed to cause illness or distress, with the goal of bringing peace to the individual, particularly for women. A very female orientated thing. But we also have folk magic, and jinn. Belief in the supernatural power of the jinn is quite prevalent all over the Middle East, and some Egyptians may turn to folk magic for protection or to influence the jinn, though this is generally discouraged by mainstream Islamic tradition. Many thanks for the cake. I've never had a cake before. That's pretty cool. Thank you for that. In the context of a nation like Egypt, magic and witchcraft can be considered a serious offense in the modern day, and some practices are viewed as a threat to religious authority and established order, and it can lead to severe punishments, reflecting the prohibition of magical practices in most mainstream Islamic theology. So, yeah, it's not liked anymore. Nevertheless, people do it. Now, what can we say about Zar? Now, exorcism is quite a serious thing, particularly because there is a great deal of belief, as we have said, in spirits, and this matters a lot. So we know that, amongst other things, you've got to deal with the negative views of spirits out there. Exorcism comes from the Greek exorchizein, a compound word made from ex, meaning out, and horchizein, to cause to swear or to bind by an oath. Now, in Greek, the word sometimes is simply used meaning to abjure, whereas the English derivatives usually refer to the swearing out of an invasive spiritual force in a formal rite of an expulsion. So it is all about spirit possession. Now, spirits to be exorcised most commonly are considered to be demons or restless ghosts, those evil spirits that penetrate into the bodies of their victims and completely control, or at least very strongly influence, their actions. And we see this in quite a few different religions. Possessing spirits may also cause physical illness, interfering with the body's normal physiological process, or mental illness by affecting the will, intellect, and emotions. But in many cultures, spirit possession is diagnosed only retrospectively. That is, the victim must display abnormal behavior for some time before friends and families diagnose them as being possessed. Both cross-culturally and transhistorically, spirit possession more seems to affect women than men, and has been a subject of much discussion among people who study the phenomenon. It may be that it's very much a social thing in that regard. Forms and prevalence of exorcism within a given culture are intimately related to the question how the invading spirits are conceived. Therefore, it matters to know what sort of things are important for that specific culture. Now, we know that Christianity has its whole set up around that kind of thing. And as you can imagine, that is absolutely the case within Egypt as well, where you're talking very particularly about the kind of beliefs where evil spirits have popped up. Now, of course, different groups do have a number of their own specific spirits, but the jinn are accused of quite a lot in that regard. In modern Islamic Egypt, spirit possession may be managed by one of two means, either through Quranic healing, which would be the official methodology, or participation in a Zar cult. Islamic demonology is extensive, and the choice of which form of healing to pursue is in part a reflection of how the inhabiting spirit is identified. Zar is actually quite a recent invention, dating only to the 1870s, and it's a form of participatory ritual group healing found in several East African countries. We found it, of course, in Ethiopia a great deal, and it is dominated especially by the women. Zar cults involve regular meetings at which participants dance to drumming with the goal of entering into individual trance states. Islamic authorities in Egypt often denounce Zar as a vulgar superstition held by women too ignorant to realize that their actions are un Islamic. Participants, however, regard the meetings as fully compatible with Islamic traditions. So, there immediately, as often is the case, you see a conflict between the official views and the views of the participants in that regard. Strictly speaking, the Tsar cult is not really a complete form of exorcism, but a recurrent form of pacification, because they believe that once possessed, you are always possessed. Norman Osborn? Don't understand that. Sorry. Huge thanks for the likes there, though. Thank you very, very much. The goal of the ceremony is to learn to coexist with the spirit by temporarily lessening the intensity of the spirit's hold on the individual. The beginning involvement with Zar is customarily a private initiation ceremony paid for by the possessed victim and attended by friends and family and other women who are possessed. After an opening prayer drawn from the Quran is said, several different drum bands perform a sequence, their purpose being to get the participants dancing and help spur the onset of a trance. The new Tsar bride, dressed in a long white tunic, is led by the Kudya, the Tsar specialist, who has assisted in the diagnosis of the victim's illness and identification of the invading spirit, or by a Tsar master. And we know now from Ethiopia that, in fact, the bands follow specific spirits, and each band is particular in their spirit groups or spirit tribes that they support. So it's quite an involved sort of a thing. The bands. There are also several kinds, including among others Gardo, the master of the toilet. The atheist Tsar master known as the Red Sultan, the Sultan of the Sea, who affects the brains, and even some Christian Tsar masters. The latter are easily identified because they make their victims desire alcohol, which is forbidden by Muslims but allowed to those possessed by Christian Tsar masters and at their specialist Tsar ceremonies. Tsar masters often have negative qualities and cause distress or illness, but they are distinct from the more purely evil Islamic demons and devils known as jinn and shayatin. Participants in the Zara dance not only with one another but with their individual Zara masters. Thus, the action, while collective, is not entirely truly communal. After the private Zar ceremony, sponsored by the family of the initiate will likely join a regular public Zar group or Hadra, and the Hadra meets regularly, usually on a weekly basis, and each participant contributes funds to pay for the drummers and to support the Kudra. The repetition of the dance ritual each week keeps the Zar master quiet within the victim, allowing her usually to pursue her normal life in all other ways. Now, your other option, as we have said, is Quranic healing, which is a more proper exorcism that definitively drives out the invasive spirits. But in this case, they are generally seen as jinn or shayateen, though sometimes might be seen as zar masters as well. The healing is usually conducted by a sheikh who specializes in Quranic exorcism on the grounds of a mosque, possibly in the upstairs room or other chamber um, of the mosque compound. These usually are group meetings with several possessed persons in attendance at once. They are segregated by gender, of course, either by some form of barrier or by designated different days of the week for the gatherings of men or of women. Nevertheless, in Egypt, as in other parts of the world, spirit possession tends to afflict women more than men. Quranic healers consider themselves as a more orthodox alternative to the Zar cult, which they deride as being superstitious, corrupt, and as anti-Islamic. And of course, this goes along with a rapid sequence of prayers recited either by the sheikh himself or one of his assistants or the whole group. And as the prayers go on, some of the possessed are likely to become excited and begin writhing and crying out. At this point, the assistants direct their prayers more loudly and forcefully at that individual. They may strike them with a stick while repeatedly shouting at the jinn to get out immediately. Eventually, the exorcist or his assistant conjures the demon, asking its name or other details of its identity and its reasons for possessing the victim. And right here, you see again that knowing the names matter. This is absolutely an important part of the ceremony. If you can name a thing, you can have power over it. And we see this in quite a few different religions and cultures. One may be possessed by a jinn for a variety of offenses, including such sins as hitting a cat. If the demon turns out not to be Muslim, it's given a chance to convert. And we found this when we examined the jinn, that they are considered, and it is written in the Quran, that they are under or should be under Sharia law, and they may convert and become a Muslim. So you get Muslim and non-Muslim jinn, which is an interesting thing. They are seen as an individual kind of being that's not a ghost, not a demon, which would be a shayateen, but not human either. The spirit is then required to enter the possessed person's finger and to indicate its presence there by lifting that digit. The exorcist then pricks that finger with a needle, drawing a drop of blood and forcing the spirit out with it. After the rite, the victim is often counseled to adopt a higher level of piety in everyday life, which is fairly traditional. So you see that it's quite a set of rules, as it were. Now, Islamic tradition holds that Muslims should not indulge in any of these things, um, but in fact should rely on God alone to keep them safe from sorcery and malicious spirits, and not resort to talismans or charms or amulets bearing symbols or precious stones believed to have magical powers or any other mean of protection. Uh, Perhaps reflecting the influence of the Islamic teaching, a large majority of Muslims in most countries say that they do not possess any of these things. The use of talismans probably would be most widespread in outside areas such as Albania and Pakistan, while the countries uh, where you have fewer than 3 in 10 Muslims say that they do wear talismans at times. Using objects specifically to ward off evil eye is somewhat more common, um, but only really in Azerbaijan or Kazakhstan do more than half the Muslims surveyed say that they rely on objects for this purpose. But it might be an admission thing as well in that regard. Reliance on traditional religious healers is most prevalent among Muslims in sub Saharan Africa and South Asia rather than in places like Egypt. But the belief in jinn is pretty much all pervasive because they are mentioned in the Quran and they are absolutely um, given teaching about in that regard. According to the Quran, God created jinn as well as angels and humans. Belief in the jinn is therefore widespread, and in 13 of 23 countries where this question was asked in a survey, more than half will tell you, yes, absolutely, the jinn do exist. And I suppose it is an important part of the religious texts in that regard. So jinn are very, very important. Um, and you get good ones as well as bad ones. You get different kinds of jinn, which is very important. Um, just as humans are seen as beings born of earth, jinn are seen as beings born of fire, but nevertheless they are created by God and therefore should fall under God's rule in that regard. The Quran and the Hadith both make reference to witchcraft and sorcery in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, and even till today, it is very much believed in. It is simply said that you are not allowed to have anything to do with it. So it is accepted that it is there. You just are not allowed to. It's evil in that regard. And the evil eye as well is very much considered to be a thing that you do need protection from. So in Egypt, the belief in magic has existed till today and is ongoing. But how you deal with it will matter. Now, what's very interesting is how things are viewed when they happen. So, a Saudi woman was in fact executed for witchcraft in 2011. And news reports described how this 60-year-old woman was executed after being convicted of practicing witchcraft on the basis of evidence such as books on witchcraft, veils glass bottles full of an unknown liquid used for sorcery, and so on. And most news accounts implied that the women were the victim of persecution by the Saudi government. And Amnesty International's director, one of them, declared that the charge of sorcery has often been used to punish people after unfair trials and exercising their rights of freedom of speech. Now, no Western reporters seem to consider whether or not the victim was actually practicing witchcraft at all, or why witchcraft is considered to be a crime punishable by death. In the West, there is a societal need to place a seemingly inexplicable incident into some kind of other context, like human rights and so on, rather than the belief in magic. But we need to understand that in that culture, and I'm not saying that she wasn't unfairly or whatever put on trial, I'm saying that magic is very much believed in. And because it is, and because it is generally considered to be a crime and a manifestation of working with evil jinn, um, it is a serious accusation and a serious crime, which the West simply doesn't accept or believe in. But in Egypt, in the Saudi kingdoms, absolutely it is. And in that regard, um, it becomes something that kind of does need to be addressed, even if you would say that, yes, it has to be addressed fairly and properly, granted, but it is believed in. Now, belief in witchcraft, sorcery, magic, ghosts, and demons is very persuasive in the Muslim world, and magical beliefs are expressed in all of the ways that we have discussed thus far: the use of amulets, consulting healers, specialist shrines, fortune tellers, animal sacrifices, and all of those kind of things, and the beliefs in those same. Now, supernatural practices can be used for good and they can be used for bad. Um, but because it is considered not allowed, therefore, it can also be seen as a crime. And in that regard, you can be dealt with for it. But a lot of people do like it, and in different places, different bits of it become important in that regard. Um, it can therefore also become a problem. And in 2010, Hamas conducted a campaign against witchcraft, arresting 150 women who were forced to sign confessions and statements renouncing the practice. According to Hamas, the activities of these women represent a real social danger because they risk breaking up families, causing divorce, frittering away of money, and sometimes their activities have criminal repercussions as well. In addition to the arrests, Hamas placed large anti witchcraft posters in mosques, universities, and government offices, warning women against magical practices and providing information to Gaza residents who might wish to accuse their neighbors of the crime. You are making sense, Catherine. You very much. Now, psychedelic or psychotropic herbs or other such substances has long been used uh, as traditions in quite a lot of different religions and quasi magical and magical systems throughout the world. Um, we know, for example, that among the Plains Indians, peyote is definitely a thing. We know that in the South American Aztec and Mayan communities, uh, raw cacao, which of course has a certain level of cocaine, uh, if prepared in the right way, was absolutely used. We know in South Africa, cannabis is very popular as that regard. We know that in Greece there were certain uh, plants such as henbane that were used, and in Italy. Um, so all over the world, there has been and is still today um, the use of, let's just call them drugs, psychedelics, to achieve that kind of thing. Now, in the greater research that I've done on the matter, you will find that when it comes to this sort of uh, magical practice, you will find that people go in one of two ways. They either go what I would refer to as the purity viewpoint, whereby they're saying you should never use anything; it must come from your own development, growth, and activities, or they go the other way. Um, yes, I believe so. Um, it never ever do those bad things, people. It's awful for you. But yes, you're correct. So the other side is very much in favor of it, which would then say that you should use often because it raises your spiritual viewpoint in that regard. Now, if you were asking about me myself, I am very much against any kind of additional substances in any form for any reason. And I suppose in most uh, my biggest reasoning is because, in fact, my older brother was an addict and died as a result of it, and that puts me right off. And I have several friends who either came close or really ruined their lives through the use of such things, which was very, very bad. So, absolutely, um, I'm against it on a personal level because I've seen that it's very easy for it to go south. However, there are exceptions, though. And by the way, Endless Thoughts, thank you so much for that gift. That is very, very kind of you. I just spotted it now. You are a darling as always. Um, the use of the Natal green, as it were, I don't consider that to be a problem. I personally don't consider it to be, as they very often claim, a gateway issue. Um, if anything, I think it is less dangerous or problematic or addictive than alcohol, to be honest, and causes less difficulties in general. I've seen far more harm done by people after the use of drinking than I ever have after people who had a bit of the green. So, in that regard, I'm going to say that I consider it to be less of an issue than even drinking is. Um, so, I don't consider that to be a psychotropic in any manner or form. Uh, I don't personally use it because I don't like how it makes me feel, and I think that I'm a little bit allergic to it. Um, some people are, it doesn't give you the good feelings, so If it doesn't, it doesn't, if that makes sense. But is not an issue to me in that regard. But yes, it's certainly important. And thank you for your words. Now, we find that in certain of surveys done, there's in Egypt a particularly prominent Egyptian psychiatrist has said that he's found in his research and experience that many Egyptians, not just the poor ones, but the highly educated, um, spend large amounts of money, even till today, on sorcery and such. And there's a growth, if anything, in this. Now, of course, he has also said that this is all superstition and bad, and it is a threat to the mental health of the nation, um, and that anyone that alleges to be a sorcerer is a fraud, and in fact, under current law, you can be arrested for that. But now that the Muslim Brotherhood has come into power and is drafting new legislation, um, uh, it's very possible that it will be changed in law, not just from a point of fraud to a point of a crime of apostasy, which of course has a terminal punishment. So it may get a lot more serious. Now, this can cause quite a lot of issue um, in that regard. So, in modern Egypt, it looks like these practices are probably going to be forcibly stopped one way or another. But belief in it is another thing entirely. And we know that there have been several of these witch hunts that have gone on, with quite a few executions since 2011 that have been recorded throughout Egypt. And it is something of a problem, but to fully comprehend contemporary witch hunts and the prevalence of magical beliefs within the Muslim world, it's necessary to understand the concept of jinn. The jinn provide Islamic explanations for evil, ill health, illness, wealth, position in society, and a whole lot of other things as well. The word jinn is derived from the Arabic root meaning to hide or be hidden, which is quite similar to our own use in English. Um, Thank you so much for those likes. Where we talk of the occult, which quite literally just means hidden. In the West, occult practices are marginalized and are regulated to pagan traditions, and many consider them to be rubbish or things like that. But you can't get into trouble for believing them. However, in Islam, jinn are an integral part of Islamic theology, and according to the Quran, um, humans were made from clay, the angels from light, and the jinn from the smokeless fire. And although belief in jinn is not one of the fundamental pillars as such, one can't really be a Muslim if you don't also believe in their existence. Indeed, Quranic message itself is addressed not just to humans, but to the jinn as well, who are not only considered to be an intelligent species, just like humans, but subject to the word of God and Sharia law in that regard. Now, while you have your angels, which are distinct, and you have your demons or shaitan, uh, also distinct. Um, Jinn are a third category, complex intermediary beings that are very similar to human, have free will, can embrace either goodness or evil, and like humans are required to worship God and will be judged on the day of judgment according to their deeds. They simply don't entirely live um, within this world. They have a world alongside as well, and therefore can move unseen, appear and disappear, uh, and so on and so forth. Now, the evil jinn are often referred to as shayatin as well, and of course fall under the command of Iblis, which we call Satan. They can take the form of humans or animals, and many fears associated with Islamic purification rites expressed uh, the symbolic attributes of the jinn. So in Islam, dogs' urine, feces, and blood are intrinsically impure, and jinn are known to shapeshift into dogs and accept impure animal sacrifice and dwell in bathrooms, graveyards, and other unclean places. So, Muslims believe that evil jinn are spiritual entities that can enter and possess people and exercise supernatural influence over them. Women are considered to be more vulnerable because they are thought to be weaker in faith and impure on several days of the month. So you can see that the jinn are very, very important uh, in regards to, and therefore the religion does need to answer to them and have rules about them, just as in standard Christianity, you have to believe in angels and demons, and there has to be an answer to those as well. Now, witches, sorcerers, fortune tellers, and those are believed to be under the guidance of these jinn, and therefore sometimes they're even referred to as jinn catchers. So it's necessary, therefore, to understand that because they are intertwined intrinsically with both the licit Quranic magic and the illicit black magic, or sihir, uh, you've got to manage how to deal with jinn. And for the most part, you're told don't. Experts can deal with the good ones um, and ward off the bad ones, but the average person should not have anything to do with them in general. Only qualified individuals, usually narrative designated by the religious authorities, are allowed to practice Quranic treatment methods, and most of those that do anything else are arrested and terminated in that regard, because you're not allowed to do it. That's the rules and that's how it goes, which is kind of horrible, yes, but nevertheless, that is the way it goes. I suppose there's not a lot you can do about. Um, we do know as well, though, that things can go a little dark in terms of these kinds of, let's call it Quranic magic. Um, Abusive quasi medical practices have been committed in the name of Quranic magic, despite the fact that there are hospitals with psychiatric sections in. A common practice, for example, is to chain the mentally ill to shrines for 40 days to ritually exorcise the jinn possessing them. Patients are fed on a strict diet of bread and black pepper, do not change their clothing and sleep on the ground, and those who do not survive the treatments are buried in earthen mounds within the shrine. Doctors in Muslim lands recognize physical and mental illnesses, but still there are those inclined to attribute inexplicable cases to possession by the jinn. And although there are mullahs and religious scholars reportedly against these practices, the custom does continue. So there is no doubt that certain clerics do believe in the powers of the jinn. And they would no more question their existence than they would the Quran. So, while it might be difficult for the Western world to understand that people would do things like this, on a certain level, you have to look at it from the beliefs of the individuals. I mean, to be fair, if you were completely unfamiliar with and did not believe in, say, the Christian rites, you would think, why get together and eat a tiny piece of fairly awful tasting bread once a week? What's the point of that? Isn't it silly? Well, if you have no belief within the religion, yeah, it kind of is. But within the religion, it's very, very important and symbolic and has a great deal of value. So dealing with things does matter. Within the viewpoint, it, of course, would be important to deal with them in a good way and without damage to people in that regard. But that's a different thing. You still have to deal with things with regards to the belief in question. I suppose that, as we know in the modern world, there's a great deal of argument as to which belief is right and why, and. But that's a completely different story. Now, we also know that there are seen to be jinn with different religions. There are Jewish jinn, Christian jinn, Muslim jinn, and atheist jinn. Palestinian stories of jinn possession are full of classic anti Semitic jinn propaganda. And in one case of possession, there was an attempted unaliving of a child by its mother, and it was blamed on the 67 Jewish jinn, transforming an ancient blood libel accusation into a new and bizarre form. Not surprising, exorcising Jewish jinn has become a growing business in Gaza at present for all of the rather frightening issues thereon. So we can see how politics and religion intertwine and affect how people view things and how magic works. And this, in many ways, is the basis, if you will, worldwide. The moment you get the accusation of witch, it becomes a serious difficulty that might come to quite difficult and dangerous situations within society. Well, I don't really know what more to say because it's a topic I certainly don't want to get into. We are more interested in the weird, the wonderful, and the slightly scary than we are in modern politics. But you can see that certain things don't change. Stuff happens, as they say, and sometimes that stuff happens in ways that are quite worrying. Now, that said, we know that in the Middle East, witchcraft and belief in it as a specifically malevolent magic, not the good kind in this regard, um, has existed for centuries and centuries. Ancient Mesopotamia talks about it. Um, Ancient Judaism, there's a very complex relationship between magic and witchcraft, and some forms of divination were acceptable, some were not, some are heretical. Um, the flavors change, and even today we know that the Kabbalah is a very particularly Jewish form of magic in that regard, and with strong Christian influence as well. So it's been there for a very, very, very long time, and has influenced and spoken to, in many ways, the way things are done, even within um, Egypt. And we see it, of course. I mean, one of the most famous stories in the Bible is Moses facing off against the uh, magicians in the Pharaoh's court, and the whole thing with the snake stick and the parting of the sea and all. And yes, from the one side they'll say no, but it was God that did it for Moses, it was evil for the other. But I'm pretty sure that from the Egyptians' point of view, it was quite the other way round. Remember that all stories, by and large, also are written from a perspective. Um, and in that way, we see that ancient Akkadian texts speak of varying forms of magic and indeed anti magic rituals. And in fact, in the Code of Hammurabi, the 18th century BC law that we have, uh, it pointed out that somebody accused of harmful magic should undergo trial by ordeal, jumping into a holy river. If they drowned, they were deemed guilty, and the accuser inherited the guilty person's estate. If they survived, however, the accuser's estate was handed over to the accused, which does seem to be fairly fair as long as you can swim. There's all sorts of stories, like in the Maklu, in the Akkadian rituals, they say that you should uh, involve a whole series of invoking various gods and burning an effigy of the witch and dousing and disposing the remains thereof, to get rid of their power. According to the Zivabush, another ancient Mesopotamian idea would be that initially it was a kind of archaic shamanic ritualistic sort of witchcraft, but it moved forward strongly. And when it did so, it became more, as we say, mathematical, using alchemy and medical knowledge and more. And then, of course, it splits into your different forms. So the idea of white magic and black magic becomes important. So as you move forward, it's explained differently because of the changes in that regard. And yeah, across the board, I'm pretty much going to tell you, don't be a witch in Egypt. Not good. You will not enjoy it. Now, let's talk briefly about Heka, the god. Now, he was not only Egyptian, he was Coptic, um, and he was the deification of magic and medicine. In ancient Egypt, the name is also the word for magic, and according to Egyptian literature, for example, in the coffin texts, Heka existed before duality had yet come into being. Uh, the term Heka was also used to refer to magical rituals as well, which was quite important. And it's identical to the Egyptian word uh, Heka, meaning magic. The hieroglyph spelling includes the symbol for the word Ka, the ancient Egyptian concept of vital force. And due to the importance placed onto names in ancient Egypt, Heka was often incorporated into personal names. Um, so, for example, you might get a name like Hekawi or Hekaf, or even just be called Heka. The goddess Isis also sometimes uh, affiliated with Heka being titled Weret Hekau, the great lady of magic. So we see that that's very, very important. The Old Kingdom pyramidic texts depict Heka as a supernatural energy that the gods possess. The cannibal pharaoh must devour other gods to gain this magical power. Eventually, Heka was elevated to a deity in his own right, and a cult devoted to him developed, and he was thereafter seen to ride with Ra on the sunboat. By the time of the coffin text, Heka is said to have been created at the beginning of time by the creator Atum, sometimes being personified as the creator god, um, presented as a man or child, and in some imagery holding two snakes. Heka is also said to be one of the three facets of the creator, along with Sia and Hu. And to tell you what is Sia and Hu, Sia or Sa was another god, so to speak, possibly a deification of uh, perception in the heliotropian Ennead cosmogony, and is probably the equivalent to the intellectual energies of the heart of Ta. So intellect, if you will. So it's life force, it's intellect, but it's also, as we say, who, um, creative utterance, the ability to make. And that, of course, is one of the most important things about both gods and humans, that we can create, which in general other things are not seen to be able to do. It is our divine spark within us that, of course, the gods fully embody. Um, During the time of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Heka's role was to proclaim the pharaoh's enthronement as a son of Isis, holding him in his arms. He's part of the divine triad in Isna, and in the Ptolemaic and Roman capital, in the third nome of Thelbaid of Upper Egypt, where he is the son of the ram-headed Khnum, and quite a succession of goddesses. His mother was alternatively said to be Nebetu, which is a form of Hathor, also Menhet, the lion-headed, and the cow goddess Mehetweret, before finally becoming more settled in later religious viewpoints as Neth, the war and mother goddess. So Wereteku, she who has great magic, was also seen as Isis in that regard. Now, how does this fit to the important stuff? The Book of the Dead. Magic in the Book of the Dead is problematic. The text used various words that correspond to magic for the Egyptians. They thought magic was a legitimate belief. So it's not just a thing, it is part of speech itself. So actions do not speak louder than words. Words and actions are the same thing, especially under Heka, which meant that if I said to you, I hate you, I want to kill you, it would also be as if I did it. And I could be therefore arrested and charged because of the utterance, because of the heka involved in the saying. So that's very, very important. And in some ways, you can see how it's kind of come through to the modern day in certain ways. Though very much you've got more of the rise of the negative spirits in that regard, at least in the modern age. So influence from outside and other religions have changed the view of magic and witchcraft. It has become more bad simply because of that. And that, it seems, by and large, is magic in accordance with Egypt. So, what do you think? Do you have any questions, comments? Do you think their view of magic was a good one, or was it a bad one? Do you think that all of these things should be considered purely evil and got rid of? Do you think that magic itself is a crime and should be punished? Or is it what you do that matters far more in that regard? It seems that different groups around the world have got different viewpoints and different beliefs. And it's a hard one to say, to be honest. I think that it's difficult to really come up with answers on it. I know for a fact that there was a saying that I've come across on more than one occasion. I don't know who originally said it, that science is really, science is merely magic we have learnt to explain, which is not a bad comment in many ways. I think it would be fair to say if you went back in time 1,000 years and waved around a flashlight, I think that people would definitely consider you a magician and would act in accordance with that. So there's no doubt. So maybe that is the case, that magic is just unexplained science. We know that while there are large quantities of things that have proved not to have scientific basis, there are plenty of things that have turned out to actually have scientific basis for them as well, and they worked so well in their magical ways because actually it was science in action. People just didn't know it was. So there's that. We know for fact that there's a number of studies that are actually ongoing in South Africa at the moment, examining a number of the traditional herbs and things that the Inyanga use. And it's being found that they've got some pretty serious medicinal properties, the real ones. And given that I actually know a couple, those that undergo the proper training, not the ones that just, quickly claim to be and are the frauds. And yes, as always, there are many, many frauds. The ones who undergo the proper training have told me some of it, and it's a hardcore thing. It's very serious. There's absolutely you're not you're not going to be able to become a serious isangoma or inyanga if you're a wussy. Let's just say that. It's very, very hard to do if you're properly trained. And there has been talk of getting these people into some kind of a formal hierarchy as such, where um, proper oversight is done quite specifically so that if anybody wants to practice as one, they can prove that they are legally and properly trained as one, um, rather than just a fraud, for the good of the consumers, which I think is very likely to be a very good idea. I think that also it will allow modern medicine to examine a lot more um, the herbs and things that are involved, and it might lead to a lot of interesting discoveries in that regard. Excuse me. Oh, do apologize. So there's a lot to be said, and I think a lot of importance that needs to be said for the value of looking at the old practices world over. I mean, we wouldn't have modern medicine if we didn't have the old ways of witchcraft. That's a fact. Um, like it or hate it, we may have bettered and modified and modernized, but it came from somewhere. Let's be fair. And perhaps an accusation which I think is fair is that the Western world deals very well with the physical and reasonably well with the mental, but we really do not deal well at all with the spiritual. And that is a lack in the Western world, I think, that needs to be addressed. So perhaps we do need to learn far more from these things as well. Um, to better ourselves, to better our viewpoint of what may in fact be out there and why it might be important. I have a friend who is a Muslim who said to me that absolutely all of these things about the jinn are fully within the Quran, they are believed, but he also said to me that they never teach you anything about it. You're just told, believe in God and don't worry, it will be handled by the experts. You don't need to know. Now, is that a good thing? I know within the Catholic Church, nobody talks about demons or demonic possession, even though it is intrinsic to the faith. It is absolutely a vital part of the Bible. You have to believe in it. So, why are we never taught about these things? Um, is it dangerous to know? Some say yes, some say no. Um, or is it that people are hiding things from the general public? I don't know. There are so many interesting things about it. We discovered, speaking of the jinn, that there are descriptions of, let's just use the term boogeyman, which exist all over the world, which fit exactly to the official descriptions of what the jinn are and how they work. So it appears that while they might be specifically spoken of only in the Middle East, they do seem to exist world over. We know that's true of ghosts, another thing nobody ever talks about, and you're not allowed to speak of for some reason. But absolutely. And I can tell you that I worked alongside the official exorcist for KwaZulu-Natal for a couple of years, and I saw some things that will make you believe in demons. They're there. So these things do exist. I've known people who have seen beings that fit the description of an angel. They are there. These things are out there, but nobody will talk about it. Nobody discusses it. You're not allowed, seems, to know anything about it. Yet it is an integral part of so many religions. And these are questions that I think have to be answered. Somebody asked in last night's live, is there such a thing as too much knowledge? I don't believe there is at all. It is absolutely necessary to know as much as possible, because what you don't know can be far more dangerous than what you do. So, yeah, that's just my opinion. And it's the point, of course, of this channel to look at the whole question of, are there ghosts? Are there aliens? Are there curses? Are there witches? And the answers that we have garnered increasingly, it seems, the more that we learn about the different things, increasingly are becoming more intertwined in that regard, that perhaps the existence of all these different things is not separate topics at all, but mixed. We know that when we looked at cryptids, descriptions that are pretty much identical come from cultures across the world in regards to the Yeti. They got different names in the different places, but it's the same damn thing, which implies that if they don't anymore, the Yeti certainly did exist. It was there. Maybe still is in remote places, or maybe it is that good at hiding. So we know that maybe Nessie doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it's an ancestral memory come down through stories. But we know that plesiosaurs did exist. We found their remains. Archaeologists have found the bones. So it's not that such a creature never existed. It did. This seems to be the case in a lot of things. And I was watching an absolutely fascinating video based on the Book of Jubilees, which is an apocryphal book from the Bible, but still remains in certain Bibles, including, most importantly, the Ethiopian Bible. And if you read it, you realize that one of the great things that they warn you against is quite literally vampires, which every culture around the world has got stories of in some way. They're described a little differently, but not a lot differently. They are the same basic thing, and they are literally in cultures that no ways had contact early on and could have influenced each other's stories, yet the stories are basically the same. And Jubilees talks of the blood curse of these vampires. And if you've ever gone and read Jubilees, you will see it. It's a fascinating book. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure why it was even kicked out of the canonical scriptures in most countries. A number of books were left out that, quite honestly, were quite beautiful. One, such as the Song of Susanna, is a stunning collection of beautiful, beautiful writing, not canonical. Who knows why? It's argued for different reasons and in different ways, but I think it's well worth a read. And in that regard, I'm going to argue that just because some topics might be a little uncomfortable or a little scary doesn't mean that they shouldn't absolutely be learned about, discussed, considered. If demons are that frightening and that important, or if the jinn exist, surely we should know about them and should be aware of what they are and how to defend against them, which I think is fair. I don't know. What do you think? Tell me what you think. Give us a comment, because it's all very well to jump around, as we've seen so many people do, saying, you know, you must believe and that's enough. But none of that allows you to grow or to develop or to become spiritually better. Sorry. I think that is a foolish view of things in many ways. And that's true of any religion. They say that you should never question it. I can't comment because it gets. I know, but you know what? Send me your comments directly in a message, and I will bring each and every one of them up at the beginning of the next live, simply because I think that your comments are some of the best we get, and that's a very important thing. Yes, I have that problem as well. There are certain words you are not allowed to mention. It is such a pathetic thing that we live in a world where people are so sensitive that even common sense becomes a danger. But what more can we say? Yeah, it's like Catherine said earlier. Certain words will get you banned, and I have been before. I will not lie to you. I have had words that were banned because people got bent out of shape about it. But send your comments to me and I will bring them up, damn it. Absolutely, it's an important thing, because I want to know as much as possible, and I know you guys do too. But with that said, we come on to the next most important bit. We have gone and looked at quite a few places, and now we need a new place and hopefully something very different. So, how do you guys feel about Russia? What do you think? The witches of Russia? Do you think it might be interesting to look at the history and the beliefs there? Do you think that Russia will be a good choice to examine? We haven't done any of the Russian or Slavic countries yet in regards witches. Oh, my dear, there are. In the old beliefs, in the pre-Christian views especially, there were some pretty funky gods and goddesses, and the worshipping of some of them was quite scary. But surely you have heard of Baba Yaga, one of the most famous Russian witches, who lived in her chicken-footed hut that could run around. So yes, Russia has got some good ones, and I will say that the view of not just witchcraft, but even the gods in Russia was pretty damn dark. So very much an interesting thing. So, well, then it will be something that I will do my best to interest and amuse you with tomorrow night, to give you a something more. Um, and I do hope you enjoy it in that regard. Uh, so, yeah, for all of you guys who came on and have been supporting and listening, Catherine, Uyanda, Sean Phillips, Ensar, forgive me, I don't read Cyrillic, so I can't give you a shout out there, sir, in that regard. But Anna Maksovic, thank you for all being a part of this. And I do hope that you've enjoyed tonight, and we will be back tomorrow, and we will see what more we can find. But until then, I bid you all the most wonderful night, and I do hope that you sleep deep, sleep sweet, but remember, sleep with one eye open, and possibly keep that holy object near at hand, because you never know of those many, many things that go bump in the night. Some might very well go bump for you. Good night.